Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of ITI's Bridge for Innovation series. Today, I am talking with Samantha Hubner, who is the Acting Director of AI Policy within the Office of Management and Budget. So excited to have you here, Samantha. Today, we're going to be talking about OMB's new memo, M2418, Advancing the Responsible Acquisition of Artificial Intelligence in Government. This provides guidance to all federal agencies on the procurement of AI for government use. Very timely, exciting topic. So thanks for sitting down to talk more about it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to sit down and kind of get into the details of this guidance with you all.
Let's jump right in, shall we?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's been a lot coming out of this administration, Office of Management and Budget. How do you see this particular guidance impacting the deployment of AI responsibly across government?
Oh, a big question to start. Fantastic.
Why not?
So, absolutely. So I think, the first thing I would want to point to is the way that you can see some natural connective tissue between this guidance from OMB and the Biden-Harris administration voluntary commitments, specifically around core principles in transparency, security, documentation. These are things that really do drive responsible AI use forward, and we want to make sure that agencies have the information and the tools that they need to reflect that in their contracts. So when you put this sort of in that broader context of the administration and all the work that's been happening on federal use of AI, I think you can, of course, first point to the executive order and the way that directed forth specific deadlines for OMB's first AI memo, M2410. A big piece of this guidance is just ensuring that we take those same principles and ensure that those contracts that are for AI systems, that they align with what we have already put forth in that initial guidance from M2410. That's a big part of what the executive order outlined for this new guidance to achieve.
I noticed that the memo really does a good job of emphasizing that this doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? All the requirements about cybersecurity and the various, additional actions we've seen for contractors still apply. This has to work together with that whole ecosystem, right? I also, I think it's interesting that this has been described as an initial means, right, for procurement. It's pretty lengthy, so for being an initial means, there's quite a lot to digest. Wonder if you could help us understand a bit more of the scope of this memo, what's covered, what does it do, and also what does it not do?
So I love that you noticed how long the memo is, because, what I think the memo tries to do, and hopefully does pretty well, we want to point to, as an initial means, purposefully putting forth recommendations as opposed to introducing new requirements, acknowledging that as the technology evolves, we're giving agencies the flexibility to evolve with it with regard to how they approach specifically the way that they negotiate those contracts. There are certain things that we want to consider, all those equities that you indicated around cybersecurity, around privacy. There are things that we want to make sure are being acknowledged and reflected in those contract terms, but the way that manifests is going to depend on the use case.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I know in coming up, you have the federal AI use case inventory. You've also been doing a lot of talking with various public stakeholders about the use cases, about the current use of AI, potential future uses of AI. I know I had the privilege of participating in some of your stakeholder outreach. Wanted to hear a bit more about how you ensured you were getting input from all impacted stakeholders, especially because you had a pretty tight timeline to get this out.
Absolutely. So for folks tuning in at home, we had about 4 months to put together this guidance. And so we were very intentional about how we pursued outreach. We wanted to make sure, to your point, Megan, that we are touching every stakeholder group that has something to say here. So we did an RFI, a request for information, that we issued alongside the issuance of M2410. We timed that to where we would have sort of the bulk of the attention on this issue. We want to make sure that people who are paying attention to the risk management are starting to think about how does risk management come into consideration for contracts. That RFI period was really successful. We got over 60 comments and it was well over 400 pages of comments to read, which was really helpful to us to get a perspective from not only industry, but academia, civil society, individuals. But in addition to that, making sure that we did the same due diligence within government, talking to government stakeholders who are sitting in the procurement offices as much as on the AI side of the house, folks that, from the privacy offices, are they being involved at that early ongoing stage to make sure that all of the voices are included when it comes to specifically the strategic planning of AI system acquisition. So, a big part of that was making sure that we continue to follow up. We did an industry roundtable to make sure that we had even more sort of insight about what industry thinks, just because a big focus of the memo that you'll see is competitive, but rather competition and ensuring that we're not getting stuck in vendor lock-in. We want to make sure that we're promoting a diversified supplier base of AI. And so a great way to do that is by making sure that we're listening to the different voices in industry, small companies, big companies, all elements across the technical stack of an AI system. So making sure that we did that in that tight 4 months that we had was a big part of why you see such a lengthy document in front of you.
Yeah, that's a huge lift. You had a busy summer. So thank you for that. Wanted to go back to something that you said. So you may know I was a federal contracting officer for several years. Sometimes, and I don't think this is unique to the procurement process, but we all get stovepiped in our roles. And this memo and really the success of everything the administration is trying to do on AI, I think really depends on that cross-functional collaboration between the government, between the private sector, really in an unprecedented manner to make sure that we get this right. You mentioned the privacy officials. I know that aspect of the memo was new to me in terms of the really active role contemplated for senior privacy officials in the agencies in the procurement process. Want to know if you could talk a bit more about that and why that was so important to this memo.
Of course. I think, a big part of the why in terms of the specific equities that you see called out, privacy among them, has to do with the language of the statute. So this guidance comes from the Advancing American AI Act, where there are specific considerations that were pointed out to OMB to consider as part of this initial means. Privacy being one of them. We want to make sure that, in issuing this guidance, we're speaking to that statutory obligation. So that was a huge aspect of it. But then, of course, when we think about, to your point, the way that this is going to happen is going to require whole of government transformation. This has been kind of a bit of the sounding board, rather the soundbite throughout the administration's work, specifically OMB's work, is how we do this together. It's not just a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to AI, and especially when it comes to buying AI.
Right, absolutely. And every agency is going to have different needs based on the nature of the data, the nature of the requirement, the use case that you mentioned. Also curious how you're thinking about, down the road, are there any sort of privacy frameworks that you're thinking about that agencies can use to manage risk to privacy, risk to data throughout the acquisition lifecycle?
So I think with that, those are questions that are going to be more addressed by that cross-council working group. The memo discusses bringing together a lot of these different equities in a way that takes advantage of a lot of existing council work as well. I think to sort of speak to the success of that, though, I can point to some of the really great things that we've been seeing with the Chief AI Officer Council just in the last year. It's coming up on a year of its existence. Within, I think, the next month or two. And so what we see there, those sorts of tools that you're mentioning, the way that those come into perspective is through those cross-council engagements, and information sharing sort of writ large is a big goal of the memo. And that's why we want to make sure we do it that way, to sort of discover where those opportunities are.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. We're also seeing, almost every day, it seems like we're seeing a new compliance plan that agencies are putting out. I know that was an initial requirement for M2410. So it's great to see, agencies putting that time and effort and thought and rolling those out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why you see toward the beginning of the memo, we talk about updating policies and processes around making sure that there are sort of mechanisms for that sort of internal agency collaboration to happen as much as interagency. So the hope is that by continuing to make compliance a very sort of agency first sort of approach. We want to make sure that we're inviting that flexibility, exactly as you said, acknowledging that all of these agencies are at different points in their journey of AI adoption.
All right, so switching gears, another aspect of the memo that was interesting in terms of the emphasis placed on this requirement is the government's really sending a strong demand signal to industry about the importance of interoperability. Wanted to know if you could talk a little bit more about that and why interoperability is so important to the government procurement of AI.
Of course, this really gets into the meat of the 5th section of the memo, where we talk a lot about strategies to prevent against vendor lock-in. Interoperability is something that you can think of as a tool by which just nature, the consideration, allows you to understand more about what the specific aspect of the technology is doing in terms of your shared infrastructure, in terms of data portability. For example, to be a little bit more specific, if I, am using data over here, does the format of that data transfer over easily to another platform? Just a question as simple as that, and asking that question up front gives agencies a lot more insight into what it is that they're buying. And so when we talk about interoperability, both in the short term and the long term, it really has more to do with just understanding the different elements of the AI technical stack and how they interact with each other.
Different agencies have different use cases, different data, may make different decisions regarding risk, regarding whether the technology is rights and safety impacting. Wanted to get your take on, how is OMB driving consistency, but also encouraging agencies to make their own subjective decisions based on sort of those common parameters that you've outlined?
Yeah, I think a big piece of this, it's born out of the information sharing and the collaboration, but that section in this memo, the way that we see that sort of manifesting from OMB's perspective has a lot to do with the council work that's already happening. So our Chief AI Officer Council, the way that the Chief AI Officers are coming together and sharing their own perspectives on how they're seeing implementation of not only M2410 going, but now as they're thinking about implementing M2418 alongside that, the way that that is going to be successful is by that continued information sharing to then inform where standardization makes sense and perhaps further cement the idea that there is still flexibility needed, just given how much the technology is continuing to dynamically evolve kind of throughout the broader ecosystem.
Right. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, what things look like 6 months, 1 year from now, just in terms of how rapidly the technology is developing. Right. Speaking of sort of innovations, rapid evolution of both the technology and the procurement process, I was very excited to see how the memo talks about the use of innovative procurement methods, innovative acquisition strategies. A lot of this, contracting officers may have already had the authority to do, but here, there's a strong, again, demand signal and encouragement of procurement officials to be forward-leaning, use those tools at their disposal that may be especially well-suited for buying AI. Wondered if you could talk a bit more about that and the emphasis on the innovative acquisition methods in the memo.
Sure. I think it was actually one of the events previously with ITI where somebody at the table mentioned, what is it that we're trying to accomplish with an initial means guidance when we don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? I think we talk a lot about this within the realm of cybersecurity, of AI. At the end of the day, is still software.
Right.
And we want to make sure when it comes to the broader IT acquisition questions, we're sensitive to that. We know that there is a lot of good work that's been happening for a while now. The memo talks about integrated product teams and leveraging an AI-trained workforce in line with a lot of what the AI Training Act for the acquisition workforce helped to achieve. And I think when it comes to how we put forth emphasis on existing things, this is why, once again, we have those very purposefully written recommendations to sort of elevate those best practices and keep them at the forefront when it comes to AI. This is something, these are known things that we can maybe leverage to continue to make sure that we're doing our homework well, our due diligence well when it comes to acquiring AI.
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be a member of the acquisition workforce in the federal government. Such an important role. Yeah, that's great to see. I know that, also the acquisition workforce and executives across agencies are going to be busy in the next couple months. You've got some pretty looming deadlines coming up. Mm-hmm. The first deadline in M2418 is November 1st. Next deadline is December 1st. Wanted to know if you could talk a bit about what are the expectations, requirements for agencies for those two deadlines. What do they need to do in the next couple weeks?
Of course. So the November 1st deadline is one that I want to make sure we're very, very sensitive to, because the guidance did come out not too long ago, and November 1st is not too far away.
Yeah.
So what's good about that, and in the sense that from an agency perspective, to be very specific, Section 5D of M2410 was all about the way to think about procurement from an AI risk management perspective. So agencies have known that contracts that are written in a way that preclude compliance with M2410 for any reason would need to be renegotiated or modified in some way to sort of make sure that they had what they needed to then comply with the documentation requirements of M2410. So that is not a new deadline in the sense of what is being accomplished in terms of what is happening at the agencies. What is perhaps a little bit more different is just that we're putting it more in writing. More is just a benchmark for agencies to have to look at and be like, all right, this is kind of how I want to set myself up for success to then hit that December 1st deadline, which also comes from M2410, December 1st being the deadline for all rights or safety impacting use cases to be in compliance with M2410 risk management requirements. And so it is going to be a very busy next few months, but OMB is continuing to work really closely with agencies just to ensure that they have the tools they need, the information they need, the access to us that they need to really help them accomplish this really meaningful work. I think it's easy to get, caught up in the policy aspect of it and the implementation aspect, but at the end of the day, it's the American public's rights and safety that are being impacted when AI is used in these use cases. And there's actually a lot of passion, I think, throughout the interagency to really bring this work together. So it's going to be busy, but it will not be without, I think, significant return, reward is the way I would phrase it. I think it's going to be a really strong win for just the government writ large to get this accomplished.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. I know we're going to be watching very closely, ITI and our members, to see, what the next steps are, especially as we're seeing more agencies go public with their requirements for contracts. I wish we had more time to talk. So many questions. We could probably talk all day. Wanted to see if there's a particular resource or place where folks want to find out more information about the memo, about your office, about this work. Where can they go to get that?
Sure. So I think the best place to go for information about our office within OMB, I sit in the Office of the Federal Chief Information Officer. So going through whitehouse.gov to the OMB page to learn a little bit more about what's happening within OMB. There's a lot happening, not just within our office, that touches on AI policy. A lot of that work is highlighted on ai.gov. There's a lot of great stuff there that you can sort of peruse at your leisure with regard to the use case inventory from last year, any sort of new requests for information or requests for comments. There's so much happening across the broader interagency, not just within OMB. So folks can definitely leverage ai.gov to stay up to date.
That's great. It's very helpful to have a one-stop shop, so to speak. Yeah. Well, I know, just turning to your workload, I know, as we've talked about, you've had a super busy summer. Wanted to know, looking ahead, where are you going on vacation?
What a great question.
Because you deserve it, let me say.
I appreciate that. I think I do hope to travel soon. I like to do an annual trip, and we're coming up on around that timing of my annual trip. We'll see where we land, but I tend to enjoy a lot of hiking abroad. So I'm looking around. I'm sort of shopping for destinations. Open to any suggestions, actually.
All right.
So for folks that have strong opinions.
Yeah. Well, that sounds lovely. I really hope you can get some time to relax. I know, there's a lot going on over the next few months, but just so appreciate the work that you and that the entire team at OMB, at the Office of the Federal CIO, everything that you all are doing, especially the industry collaboration. It is so appreciated. And wanted to make sure that folks know that if you'd like to learn more about ITI, about our public sector policy work and advocacy, you can also find more info about that at www.itic.org. Thank you, Samantha. We'll talk soon.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.